Prime Minister, how are you done reflecting? Will you stay or will you go, sir?
Justin Trudeau breaks days of public silence. Remarks terse. Questions taken? None. His future? Clear as mud. But tonight, that future is the story Canadians want figured out, and the plot definitely thickened.
What is clear is that Justin Trudeau does not have the confidence of Parliament.
Pierre Poilievre spoke for Conservatives, but referenced the Bloc, some Liberals, and new support from the NDP. It says it's done propping the Liberals up. Now it will vote them out.
It's time that we all get on the same track.
This is a time for unity.
We absolutely support the Prime Minister.
All of it on a day members of a new cabinet say their focus is policy. But will that last months, weeks, or just days? This political page-turner isn't written yet.
From CBC News, this is The National with Asha Tomlinson.
Thanks for joining us. Ian is away. Tonight, the pressure is growing for the Prime Minister with that promise from the NDP to topple the government with a non-confidence vote. The news coming just as cabinet shuffle was getting underway. 8 new ministers were sworn in and 4 others saw changes to their jobs. And while those ministers answered questions, the Prime Minister dodged the biggest one. Will he resign? Trudeau did not address Canadians at Rideau Hall. Instead, cabinet ministers were left to try and explain where he went. That's where Ashley Burke begins our coverage tonight.
He's left you alone in the cold. Where is he?
The Prime Minister missing in action, leaving his newly minted ministers to do the talking.
The Prime Minister is not here today to answer questions and address Canadians. My questions for each of you, what do you make of that?
We were just with him inside and had some great conversation as to the work that we have ahead of us.
Justin Trudeau is speaking to Liberals, but not to Canadians, leaving them in the dark about his future and his cabinet fielding questions only he can answer.
What assurances has the Prime Minister given you that he will stay on until the next election?
I think the Prime Minister was quite clear that he has a choice that he's reflecting on.
On Monday, Trudeau privately told his caucus he'd reflect after some of his own MPs told him to resign, upset about how he tried to replace Chrystia Freeland as finance minister, leading to her stunning resignation.
It was very disturbing to hear what happened on Monday.
Ever since Trudeau's only addressed 2 private Liberal events.
Will you step aside, sir?
Orban spotted leaving his office.
Why do you show confidence in the Prime Minister?
Prime Minister's the Prime Minister.
While ministers entered the front door at Rideau Hall, Trudeau showed up inside at his cabinet shuffle after using a different entrance away from the cameras. That same hour, the NDP's leader released a letter saying the Liberals don't deserve another chance. That's why the NDP will vote to bring this government down, but didn't say when.
The chaotic clown show.
The Conservatives now calling for Parliament to be recalled from holiday break.
We have a guy here who has lost control of everything, and yet he clings to power.
At the end of a long week, Trudeau finally made his first public statement.
Prime Minister, are you going to step down?
Since the crisis began.
We just had an excellent cabinet meeting that was almost entirely focused on the Canada-US dynamic.
The Prime Minister trying to make the government look like it's in control during a tumultuous time.
How are you done reflecting?
Merry Christmas, everyone.
Will you stay or will you go, sir?
Trudeau wouldn't answer any questions or address his future, leaving what everyone still wants to know hanging. Will he resign?
Yeah, that question is in the balance. So, Ashley, what happens now?
Well, sources say the Prime Minister is going to take the holiday to reflect, and that isn't sitting well with some of his MPs. More than 20 have now come out publicly urging him to step down. One today said that after the week that just unfolded, it was incumbent on Trudeau to acknowledge what happened and share the direction he's headed, but that didn't happen.
All right, Ashley Burke, thank you. CBC News chief political correspondent Rosemary Barton is here. Rosie, what do we know about the Prime Minister's current thinking on his future?
Asha, he's still very much, we're told anyway, processing what's been the most difficult political crisis of his career. Again, we know he was blindsided, certainly, by Chrystia Freeland's resignation and the way this whole week has unfolded. And I would say that for the first time since this push against his leadership started, he is seriously reflecting on whether he should stay or go. That might be surprising for some people that he would even be contemplating staying, but he is legitimately still considering that option, given some of the challenges Canada is facing, particularly the Canada-US challenge.
Okay, yeah. And, beyond his own reflection, what else will be playing into his decision, you think?
Yeah, it's not just that mounting pressure from inside the Liberal caucus, Asha. There's also now these external factors he can't control. All opposition parties are now on the same page, saying an election is needed, which means that even if he were to decide to stay on, he'd be facing an election this spring at some point or another. And the other big factor in all of this is, of course, Donald Trump. We're now a month out from Trump taking office, potentially putting those 25% tariffs in place against Canada. And the weakness of Trudeau's leadership right in the face of that is a serious problem for the country. So unless there is a way to blunt those two external factors, it does seem very difficult right now to see a path forward for the Prime Minister.
So much to watch for. Rosie in Ottawa, thank you.
You bet.
Clearly a lot to break down here, and Rosie will be back with a supersized ad issue. How long can the Prime Minister hang on to his job? That's in about 15 minutes. Turning to other news now, in a deadly attack at a Christmas market in Germany. A car rammed into the crowd, killing at least 2 people. Dozens more are injured. A warning, the story has a graphic image. And as Sarah Levitt explains, this isn't the first time something like this has happened.
Chaos in Magdeburg just days before Christmas. A busy and festive holiday market in the small German city near Berlin turned into a scene of horror. This freeze-frame image taken from CCTV footage shows the moment authorities say a man plowed his car into the bustling crowd at high speed. Stay still, don't move, police shout, moments before taking the suspected driver into custody. This is a terrible tragedy, German State Premier Rainer Hasselhoff says. He notes all signs point to this being an attack by a lone perpetrator. At least one of those killed here, a small child. The driver, he says, is a 50-year-old man from Saudi Arabia, a doctor with a practice in a nearby town who's been living legally in Germany since 2006. The motive behind the attack unclear, the suspect not previously known to German authorities. Magdeburg's hospitals were overwhelmed by the sheer number of injured, at least 60 people, exceeding their capacity. Some victims had to be flown to a neighboring town. This attack, eerily reminiscent of one 8 years ago in Berlin. There, a man drove a truck into the crowd at a Christmas market, killing 13 and injuring 55 others. In Magdeburg, tents shield what's inside from public view. The market now cordoned off and empty, strewn with objects dropped as people scrambled to get away. Family members left frantically trying to find their loved ones. A joyful time of year turned sorrowful instead. Sarah Levitt, CBC News, London.
Palestinian health officials say 25 people were killed today in a series of Israeli airstrikes across Gaza, including one on a refugee camp. Children among those hurt when the strike hit an apartment building inside the camp. 8 people were killed. Israel says it only strikes militants and blames Hamas for civilian deaths because its fighters operate in residential areas. For the 3rd time this year, a Jewish elementary school in Toronto has been the target of gunfire. It's the latest violent incident in a rising tide of anti-Semitism. And as Jamie Strachan tells us, the community is both on edge and angry.
Outside of Toronto's Beis Chaya Mushka Elementary School, sniffer dogs, cruisers, police tape, and fear.
Students are afraid, staff are afraid,
and no one should be afraid to come to school.
Inside, behind the shattered glass, the wall of a room where children play, punctured by bullets.
It's very, very hard to be woken up in the middle of the night to such news, and it is now the third time. Parents are concerned, frustrated, in fear.
This is the third time this school, home to 250 students, has been sprayed with bullets in the middle of the night. Arrests have been made in one of the attacks.
I can't put myself in the shoes of the Jewish community. I can only try to understand. I can tell you right now, from everyone from the chief right on down, is putting all the resources that we can into this.
Despite everything, there is resiliency here.
I said, there's no question, we're going to send our children to school because that's the right thing to do. Because if in any way we try to show them that we're intimidated, then what could they do next?
This shooting, part of a troubling pattern of anti-Semitic violence. In October, Toronto police reported a 75% increase in the number of hate crimes targeting Jews compared to the year before.
What you're seeing is an entire societal failure, all the way from Ottawa down to the local government, to grapple with the lawlessness that is going on in our streets and in our cities. What has become of this city? What has become of this country?
Mayor Olivia Chow issued a statement saying enough is enough, calling the shooting unacceptable. Not nearly enough, say many in Toronto's Jewish community.
There needs to be action, and there needs to be action now. The hollow condemnations, the thoughts and prayers are simply not enough.
Police have set up a full-time command post at the school, but as the Jewish community prepares for Hanukkah, the festival of light, a feeling of darkness remains. Jamie Strachan, CBC News, Toronto.
A warning tonight for travelers who went through Toronto's Pearson Airport on December 8th. Toronto Public Health says you may have been exposed to the measles virus. A person with a confirmed case flew from Dubai into Terminal 1 that Sunday on Emirates Airlines flight EK241. The virus can linger in the air and on surfaces for up to 2 hours. So if you were there, you should monitor for symptoms like fever, runny nose, cough, red eyes, and a red rash. Just hours before the deadline for a U.S. government shutdown, Congress passed a last-ditch funding bill, capping days of dysfunction spurred by the world's richest man, Elon Musk. As Chris Reyes explains, tonight in Congress, his blessings seem to help keep the government open.
The bill is passed, and without objection, the motion to reconsider is laid on the table.
With that strike of the gavel, U.S. government workers can head into the holidays secure their paychecks will keep coming for now.
This is a very important piece of legislation. It funds the government, of course, until March of 2025. That was a big priority for us.
It's a surprise victory for Speaker Mike Johnson, who's been walking on a tightrope all week after a funding bill he negotiated was attacked by Elon Musk with a threat to fund campaigns against lawmakers who supported it. Then another bill, heavily influenced by Musk and Donald Trump, failed to pass on Thursday. In it, a key demand from the president-elect to suspend the debt ceiling, which would have allowed him to more easily pass his tax cut agenda. Johnson removed that from the new bill, rallying Democrats and pushing away some Republicans.
I assume that many Republicans in the House voted against it tonight because it didn't include the greasing of the wheels in the way that Trump wanted to pass that tax cut next year for the very, very rich.
The revised bill is a pared-down version of the one that failed, focusing mostly on disaster relief and aid for farmers.
This was a necessary step to bridge the gap, to put us into that moment where we can put our fingerprints on the final decisions on spending for 2025.
Musk, whose new role is to cut government waste, reacted positively on his platform X. The speaker did a good job here given the circumstances, he wrote. It went from a bill that weighed pounds to a bill that weighed ounces. From the Democrats, a signal to challenge the incoming Trump administration on programs like cancer research funding that got cut out of the bill.
There are still things to be worked on, and we look forward to that fight in the new year. Happy holidays.
You know, what was pretty obvious in the voting is that this was not something lawmakers on either side wanted hanging over government workers this holiday season. The bill passed with an overwhelming majority, well beyond the 2/3 vote needed.
And Chris, there was a clear show of influence here, right, from Elon Musk. Tell us about that.
Asha, that was unmistakable. When Trump torpedoed that bipartisan bill with a list of demands, Elon Musk was right there posting on X about why the bill should be killed. When it passed, he was first to react. And last night, a Republican senator was on a late-night show suggesting Musk should replace Mike Johnson as Speaker of the House. So what's becoming obvious here is just how powerful and influential Musk is. And Trump hasn't even officially moved back into the White House.
Chris Reyes in New York, thank you.
Thank you.
A serial nurse impersonator already doing time in an Ontario prison is being sentenced to more time behind bars. A BC Supreme Court judge handed down a 7-year sentence today to Brigitte Clairaut. She's convicted of treating as many as 1,000 patients in Vancouver, Victoria, and Surrey, even though she's never been professionally accredited. Clairaut is currently serving prison time in Ontario for a similar conviction. So today's sentence will add another 3 or 4 years to her prison term. For First Nations across Canada, a dark cloud is hanging over this season of celebration. There's a huge backlog of requests for federal funding to feed and support children. And many of the applicants say their need is urgent. Karen Paul shows us what can happen when the response is request denied.
The spirit of giving kicked in for an Inuk-owned business after an order for 7,000 pounds of food was suddenly cancelled.
Thank you so much for this contribution. It's amazing. Are you a hugger?
Yeah. Tessa Blakey Whitecloud will use the surprise donation to feed clients at this Winnipeg shelter.
The intention was for this to be in community, and the original plan didn't work out.
The food was originally ordered by the Tatasqueyak Cree Nation in northern Manitoba, intended to fill 200 Christmas hampers. Then the supplier got an email from the First Nation
saying we've had an unfortunate circumstance involving some funding and we need to cancel the hampers.
They had put in an application to get the funding to support their off-reserve members, and that the application had been denied.
The funding request was made under Jordan's Principle, a court-ordered program meant to fill gaps in government services and supports for First Nations children. The Office of the Minister of Indigenous Services Canada confirms this request was denied because it didn't meet the criteria, saying, in part, seasonal gifts for families are not something covered through Jordan's Principle, as it is not a service the government provides, nor is it within the spirit of why Jordan's Principle was created in the first place.
Our First Nations children and families are in crisis.
First Nations leaders and advocates say federal funding delays and denials are putting children at risk. The Canadian Human Rights Tribunal has ordered Canada to deal with the backlog, estimated at 140,000 cases.
Many of our communities right now are being denied by the government.
In Alberta, educational assistants have been laid off. In Quebec, money for sports and recreation is at risk. In this case, at least, perishable food has been put to good use.
We're happy about that, sad about how it happened.
Still, their company is eating the $20,000 bill. Karen Pauls, CBC News, Winnipeg.
We want to return to our top story now. Rosie is back after the break for a supersized edition of At Issue. Trudeau's political future in crisis tonight after another tumultuous day in Ottawa.
Hi, Asha. That's right. Our third At Issue of the week. The Prime Minister has lost his most important opposition partner, Jagmeet Singh, pulling his support today in a biting open letter. And Pierre Poilievre wants to see Trudeau's downfall even sooner.
Every minute that this chaotic clown show goes on is irresponsible for Canada.
He wants the House recalled immediately for a non-confidence vote.
Why do you sell confidence to the Prime Minister?
Prime Minister's the Prime Minister.
It's drama that is stealing the spotlight from Trudeau's cabinet shuffle that saw 8 new MPs added to his inner circle. Andrew Coyne, Althea Raj, and Aaron Wary join me next to break it all down. At issue tonight, mounting pressure on the Prime Minister. The NDP is now calling for a confidence vote when the House resumes, and Pierre Poilievre wants that to happen sooner than scheduled.
We're focusing on the chaotic clown show that is costing Canadians today. This cannot go on.
What's to be made now of how the opposition has responded to this chaotic week? Are they now united against the Liberals? I'm Rosemary Barton, here to break it down tonight. Andrew Coyne, Althea Raj, and in for Chantal Hébert tonight, Aaron Wary. Good to see you all, two of you for a third time this week. Let's start, Andrew, with the shift from the NDP. No longer just calling for the Prime Minister to resign, but saying that they plan to put forward a confidence motion of their own to bring down the government.
Well, assuming that they actually mean that, assuming that they actually follow through on it, that would materially affect. I mean, I've until now been, Team October in terms of when the election was most likely to be. I think this materially affects that, moves it forward into the spring, most likely, almost certainly. If that's the case, then it's going to put a lot of pressure on the Liberals to have a new leader in place in time for such an election, in which case there'll be pressure on more pressure than before, I think, on the Prime Minister to step down and make way for that. So I think these are the knock-on effects of that. This really does change the landscape.
Yeah, I will say I am like Andrew, not sure about the NDP, what they're saying. Certainly it's clearer than it was earlier in the week, but it also seems to have the condition that it has to be their confidence motion. It's not the confidence motion at the earliest possibility. So I don't know if that's intended wiggle room, but it certainly heightens the pressure on the Prime Minister, Althea.
I think there's only so many times you can cry wolf before people just tune you out completely. So I'm less skeptical about what wiggle room they will try to find to not do it. And I have slightly a different read on the situation than Andrew. I think it actually allows the Prime Minister to stay. It both means that caucus is under intense pressure to pick a leader from their midst, and it gives Justin Trudeau a pathway to say, look, we're going to face an election. We don't have time to have a fulsome leadership race. Stick with the devil, stick with me. Who it really hurts are people like Mark Carney and Christy Clark, because if you're going to have a very short leadership race, basically means the Liberals need a prorogue. There's no way that you can have one party, a minority government in Parliament, with this filibuster that we also have and the second filibuster that we also have. It's just going to be utter chaos. So one assumes they would prorogue. That means the Liberals are going to be framed as you're suspending Parliament for your own personal reasons. The Governor-General may say yes, but it would have to be a very short leadership race. So that's a really difficult scenario. It means that we're going to see, and we've already started to see it today, people come out and say, you should pick Chrystia Freeland. You should pick Dominic LeBlanc. Pick heavyweights that are already there to replace the leader. Or just say, well, Justin Trudeau's there. We're going to suffer the loss, and we're going to have a full leadership after.
Yeah, that's interesting. I mean, you can certainly read it both ways, Aaron, that there is pressure or opportunity here for Justin Trudeau.
Yeah, I mean, I think it does at least, when there's so much that's unclear at this very moment, it does offer a sort of modicum of clarity insofar as we do know now that if you assume, I guess, that the NDP is going to follow through on this, and I think, their runway to kind of continue supporting this government has probably run out. But if they do follow through on this, that means that sort of in the best case scenario for Justin Trudeau, he's looking at going into an election, late January, early February. So, we're really talking about weeks left for him to continue governing before he goes into an election. I think Althea is right. The only way you have a leadership race at this point is if you prorogue Parliament. It would, there is some sort of hypothetical number at which if they said, let's prorogue Parliament until, June or July or something, where the Governor-General would be under some pressure to sort of clip their wings a bit. But that is the only way this government, I shouldn't say the only way, it's the only sort of justifiable way that a confidence vote gets put off much further than early February.
Let's talk a little bit about Pierre Poilievre. I mean, we can get into his plan to write to the Governor-General, which isn't a thing that's going to work, but he does seem quite determined for an election to happen. And I wonder, Andrew, is that because a leadership race is in some way worse for the Conservative Party as an outcome? And let's be clear, we don't know that Justin Trudeau is going anywhere. We'll talk about that in the next block. But he was really ramping up the pressure today again, Pierre Poilievre.
Yeah, and I don't think it looked very good on him. I thought he'd had a few good days before this. He was looking and sounding more prime ministerial than I can recall, more measured in his tone, gave a good speech in Parliament, appealed to blue Liberals for, make common cause. Not the usual tone you hear from him. This cockamamie business of the Governor General should force the Prime Minister to recall Parliament because now Parliament has lost confidence. You don't lose confidence until you actually have a confidence vote. It's not because somebody writes a letter somewhere or posts it on Twitter. And the Governor General is obliged to follow the advice of her First Minister, not the other way around. So she can't force him to recall Parliament. He maybe is well advised to, from a moral or political standpoint, that it's, this has increased the uncertainty around and the weakness of his government and his prime ministership. But dragging the Governor General into it, he will know that that's not constitutional. So he's once again playing upon the ignorance of people who don't know that to score a cheap political point. So several good days in a row, I think, knocked off by this silly stunt.
Yeah, I can't imagine that Pierre Poilievre doesn't know that what he's asking for is not possible, Althea. So I would imagine that's really just about trying to create, a pressure point for the Prime Minister.
Well, it's about changing the narrative. All day, Jagmeet Singh was dominating the narrative. We were not talking about the Liberal cabinet shuffle. The Prime Minister looked to be in hiding. Here is Mr. Poilievre rushing to Parliament. So we have the background of Parliament. Mr. Poilievre is at work. Mr. Poilievre is caring about Canadians, and everybody else is caring about their own self-interest. So he got that message through. He also got the message about calling the NDP's bluff, frankly. And I don't really think it's about trying to make sure that the Governor General recalls Parliament without talking to the Prime Minister. Of all the things that Pierre Poilievre has said that are not constitutionally sound, this is like one of the least worrisome for me. Like in that scrum, he talked about how it was completely unconstitutional that the opposition parties back in 2008 tried to form a coalition. No, that's not unconstitutional at all. They totally acted appropriately. Like he's reframing history in ways that concerns me. This, he can write to the Governor General and ask her for whatever he wants. It doesn't mean that she's going to do it. Could she call the Prime Minister in for like a little chin-chat about what's going on? Maybe what Justin Trudeau does is say, to hell with all of you, we're going to have an election, I don't think that that's worrisome. I actually think it was a good move on the Conservatives' part.
Yeah, you're right. It was, go ahead.
Just very quickly, he said sillier things in the past, but this is particular timing when we're in a crisis, when we're facing the bully boy down south, where people are really looking for steadiness and judgment and calm in the face of crisis. And this did not sound that way.
Okay, Aaron, you got about 30 seconds to weigh in there.
Yeah, I don't think you can stand in the foyer of the House of Commons and say that the other guys are a clown car and you have the brains to take on Donald Trump, and then in the next breath say, I'm going to write a letter to the Governor General and get her to recall Parliament, because he knows that's not going to happen. To your point earlier, there is some risk to Pierre Poilievre here, at least insofar as we know where the polls are at with Justin Trudeau as the leader of the Liberal Party. I would never suggest that they're going to completely change with a different leader, but they could change somewhat.
Okay, we're going to leave it there. When we come back, we're going to look at the cabinet shuffle. We'll look at how Justin Trudeau and the Liberals have responded to a chaotic week. That's next. At issue tonight, the cabinet shuffle. As the Prime Minister fills a depleted front bench, the elephant in the room, his future.
We just had an excellent cabinet meeting that is almost entirely focused on the Canada-U.S. dynamic. We know how important it is for Canadians that we be there to protect not just the Canadian economy, but their jobs, the cost of living challenges they're facing that could get worse. We have a lot of work to do, and that's what we're focused on.
So will those changes help steady the Liberal Party and Justin Trudeau's leadership? And what is he considering as he contemplates his future? Here to break it down again, Andrew, Althea, and in for Chantal, Aaron Wherry. Start with you, Althea. I actually thought the shuffle was pretty interesting in terms of the messages it was trying to send and the channel it was trying to change. But what do you make of it?
It's hard to remember that there even was a shuffle today. I'm sorry to say, Rosie. Maybe you remember it because of your live coverage.
I was on for a long time. Yeah.
It's such a mixed bag because it changed so much. You can easily tell that there was a plan and that plan has changed. So some of it is like Nate Riskin-Smith, for all the problems it has caused within the Liberal caucus and accentuated some of the dissenters calling for Justin Trudeau to resign. This is our new housing minister. He's a really good communicator. And he's a young person who can speak to young people in ways that don't sound like Liberal talking points. But at the same time, you know, they've padded the cabinet with ardent loyalists, some of whom cannot communicate at all. And we saw that in the scrums that followed the cabinet shuffle. It's not the greatest team. Like, it kind of looks like we went down the rank, and, you know, apologies for some cabinet ministers that are actually quite great, but, you know, it looks like this is what, you know, the DEF team looks like. It does look like a government that has run out of steam. And frankly, a lot of those cabinet ministers understand they're not in their portfolio for very long. And I think some of them were disappointed today because they know that runway after Jagmeet Singh's letter has shrunk rapidly, and they won't have a chance to actually implement the change that they had hoped to do.
So, Aaron, do you see the cabinet shuffle as a stopgap? Do you see the cabinet, as it stands now, as a cabinet that could be in an election campaign? Or is it none of those things? How do you read it?
I mean, I guess it may be an election campaign only by force of the NDP. I don't know that this is an election cabinet. I mean, we know that a week ago, there was a different plan on the table, and that plan may or may not have involved Mark Carney. It seemingly involved some kind of larger move on the Canada-US front. The message that the Prime Minister gave after meeting with Cabinet today is, I imagine, the sort of message he wanted to give after making that other Cabinet change, that other Cabinet shuffle. And so it's hard to look at this Cabinet and not see the fact that it wasn't the first choice. There are some interesting choices within it. Nate Erskine-Smith, even David McGuinty to public safety, I think, is interesting given his previous role with the National Security Committee of Parliamentarians. You know, I think in an alternate universe, you know, Andrew and other people are talking about the fact that Anita Anand is going to be focused on internal trade, an issue that we're supposed to be talking about to counter the threat of Donald Trump. But it's so hard to get away from 5 days ago, and it's so hard to get away from the fact that we again don't know what the Prime Minister is going to decide to do.
Yeah, there was sort of a cloud hanging over the whole event. I'm sure for some people it was a very exciting day, but it was still not the day that had been planned a couple of weeks ago. Andrew.
Yeah, this was a patching the leaks on the listing ship type of cabinet shuffle, not bold new visions and vistas of the future. You know, we talked about this last night. I think it was last night, or how long ago it was.
Last night,
It had two purposes in mind. One was to fill the holes left by these departing ministers, and the other was to convey a sense of business as usual. Well, there's a basic tension between those two. It's not business as usual because they're having to fill the holes left by all these departing ministers. I think it's particularly telling that there would be such objections to Nate Erskine-Smith's appointment in particular, on the grounds that he hasn't been slavishly loyal enough. Part of the reason that the Liberals are in the trouble they're in is because they've been so slavishly loyal to one leader. And you can see it, of course, in most of these cabinet appointments, as was alluded to earlier. You're down now to the fanatics and the loyalists and the members of the Prime Minister's wedding party. It's not a great look. It's not a look of a big church, broad tent party that can appeal to lots of Canadians. You're down to sort of the hardcore, the Praetorian Guard of Justin Trudeau.
Okay, so then let's ask the other question. Does it do what it needs to do to stabilize things for now, Althea? Does it at least do that?
Well, look, the government has to function regardless of what's happening with the Liberal Party. And it was not a tenable situation to have, you know, 3 cabinet ministers with 2, or in the case of 3 portfolios that require a lot of attention, especially in light of, you know, what's coming up on the horizon with Donald Trump's return to the White House. So there needed to be a shuffle. It's interesting that some of the people were vetted this week, which means, I'm sorry, but you weren't the top pick. Also interesting that, you know, there's no representation from British Columbia. That's new. There's no representation from Alberta. They only had one person to pick from, but still. You know, so it's not... I don't think that the cabinet shuffle will do what it is intended to do other than become basically a caretaker government. I think the bigger thing that happened today or didn't happen today, which is kind of outrageous and I feel like I need to point it out, is the Prime Minister did not talk to Canadians. His deputy Prime Minister straight up quit on Monday, said he was like financially inept. The Liberal Party was too focused on itself. We had more and more Liberal MPs come out from the shadows and say they think he needs to leave. He shuffles his cabinet and he doesn't address the country. Like, this is not appropriate. This from the leader who told Canadians 9 years ago that sunshine was the best form of disinfectant and he was going to change the relationship that the Parliamentary Press Gallery had with Liberal cabinet ministers. This is not accountability. This is not transparency.
There was that 13-second clip off the top of this segment.
Oh, that's like 30 seconds coming in and ignoring all the reporters' questions. The government is in crisis. Pierre Poilievre is right to point it out, and he's not addressing it.
Aaron.
Yeah, I think to Althea's point, this government kind of operates, or this Prime Minister kind of operates, on the idea that you don't go out to say something until you have something to say. And I think the problem is that he maybe doesn't quite yet know what he wants to say. But that in and of itself is a problem. And, you know, I do think it is, you know, problematic, I guess, that you have all of this going on and the Prime Minister hasn't come out and said something. I don't think... You know, look, the country's not going to collapse. The government's not going to fall apart. The country will continue functioning. But it is, you know, it is a gap. To get back to the cabinet shuffle slightly, if there is some kind of piece of this that you can look at, you know, Nate Erskine-Smith is having to make the decision that he's going to run again to go into cabinet. I think it is an interesting move insofar as he is one of their best communicators. Listen to him explain a policy and then listen to almost anyone else in this government explain a policy. And there's a clear difference. But the other thing I wonder about is, are the Liberals at a point, and they probably are, where they have to worry about winning a riding like Beaches East York? Because there really isn't a path back to government if you can't win a riding like Beaches East York.
Yeah, and that's in Toronto for people that don't know where that riding is. Okay, we're going to take a very short break. When we come back, we'll look at what's next. Will there be an election? Will Justin Trudeau make a decision? We'll discuss all that after this. At issue, what comes next? Justin Trudeau finally spoke in public briefly, but Canadians are still waiting for answers. How long will the Prime Minister hang on? And when might Canadians go to the polls? So here to answer those very simple questions and what Canadians might be in for, Andrew, Althea, and Aaron. This is our shortest block, and I'll ask the hardest question. How long can Canada wait for Justin Trudeau to make up his mind? Aaron, why don't you start us off?
I mean, I guess we may find out how long they can wait. I think, you know, I think taking a couple weeks is probably your maximum allowable period to reflect on things. You know, coming back in that first week of January would seem to make some sense if he's going to take the holidays to think about it. What he's going to decide, I think, is just about anyone's guess. You know, I suppose if you're Justin Trudeau, you're thinking to yourself, you may be thinking to yourself, I'm still the best person to lead this party into an election, either because I'm going to do the best of any of the possible contenders, or because there's no sense switching leaders to an election you're going to lose. The party's probably going to lose. I think the flip side of that question is, how much worse could it get? If he comes out, say, on January 6th and says, I'm going to stay on and fight, are cabinet ministers going to stand behind him? Are there any other ministers who are going to quit? How many more Liberal MPs will call for him to resign? How many more Liberal MPs will say they aren't going to run again? Those are, I think, the questions that he has to be asking himself.
And I will say, Andrew, and I'm sure everyone has had this experience, you will get a different answer based on who you talk to, who's talked to him. There is no clear sense of where this is going.
We had a great story at the Globe where, you know, there three people came out of meetings with him. One said he's definitely staying. One said he's definitely going. And the third said, well, he was going to quit, and then he was talked out of it.
Yes, I've experienced the same thing.
So, you know, it's a matter of weeks, which makes, of course, this cabinet shuffle all the more ludicrous or indeed ghoulish. I mean, these people have several weeks of political life left to live at most. To take Althea's point from earlier, you know, he can certainly make the case that he's the best person if there's going to be a sudden and short election to carry them in. And I might have made that case myself until fairly recently. But The problem is people can make counter arguments to that, and he's become so toxic to so many people, particularly after the events of the last week, that I'm not sure he's going to carry the day on it. But the more important point is, if an election is going to be upon us fairly shortly, that choice is going to have to be made as to whether to stay with the Prime Minister or to go with somebody else. His fortunes had lain in leaving that kind of vague, oh, we'll decide that sometime in the future, let's not get into that right now. The choice is going to be forced upon the party and upon him one way or another very shortly.
Althea?
I don't think it's how long Canadians need to wait. I think it's how long Liberal MPs need to wait and are willing to wait, frankly. Yeah. I, too, have spoken to people who've spoken to the Prime Minister, and so if you parse some of his words, it looks like he kind of is saying both things at the same time. I think the only thing that you can really be sure is that he is actually thinking about it, or wants to be seen to be thinking about it. If he wants to fight, then he probably should stay in Ottawa and work the phones and not go on holidays, because he will be able to gauge whether or not he can continue. Because with the anger that there is at the moment within the caucus, I would not be surprised to see a press conference with, 50 MPs saying we're not going to support him. If there is such a movement, and you're already seeing the leadership camp on the Dominic LeBlanc side, on the Chrystia Freeland side start to organize, and those that are not saying anything, you wonder if they've made the calculation that, frankly, it's better for them, for Justin Trudeau, to take the loss, because they can't win a short national contest. They could only win a long contest where they can get their brand and their name recognition known.
30 seconds to you, Aaron.
Yeah, my mind periodically turns back to the Joe Biden situation where, there are obvious differences. I wrote a column about it. There's lots of differences between Joe Biden's situation and Justin Trudeau's situation. But the thing I come back to is eventually the decision had to be almost imposed on Joe Biden. There had to be someone like Nancy Pelosi who basically could come to him and say, you're dropping out or else. Yeah. And I just don't know. I wonder whether Liberals are willing to impose that decision on Justin Trudeau. He has to decide, whether it's the best idea for the Liberal Party to go in, but Liberals also have to make that decision.
Listen, thank you all for this. Thanks for doing this 3 times. Aaron just has listened to me talk all week in the office. So thanks to everybody for all your extra work this week. That is that issue for this week, and hopefully the last one for now. With that, I'll throw things back to Asha in Toronto.
Coming up, we start our 12 Days of the Moment countdown with a remarkable rescue.
And I said, help, help, I'm caught in a riptide.
How a couple of Montreal teens saved the day, and 2 lives. Next in our moment. This holiday season, The National is bringing you a countdown of the most popular moments from the last year. We're calling it the 12 Days of the Moment. The segment often involves the kindness or bravery of complete strangers. And that's where we're starting our countdown. 2 teens who put their own lives at risk to save 2 people they'd never met.
Well, it was a beautiful day, as you can imagine, a bit windy. We didn't think anything of it. We'd been in the sea off this particular beach many times. Robert said, oh, we're drifting a bit. I was swimming and swimming and not getting anywhere. And I think, I'm caught in a riptide. And I said, help, help. And these 2 young girls at the end of the beach, one of them looks over and she comes towards me. I'm shouting, no, get a lifeguard. And she said, there aren't any lifeguards.
I put her onto my boogie board and I said, hold on to this as tight as you can and I'm going to bring you back.
The woman was talking about how her husband was further out and he couldn't swim very well. So me and Zoe, we went back out.
She was like, no, you're too little, you won't be able to. He's a big guy. But when I got the husband, I tied the strap that came from the boogie board onto my ankle because I figured it'd be easier. And we swam until he could touch the sand.
Zoe and Emma saved our lives. There's no 2 ways about it.
Wow, brave and quick thinking. The whole reason Emma was there in Barbados, she was on a 10-day training camp for Olympic trials. So that's yet another incredible achievement right there. She has her eyes fixed on making it to the 2028 Games. As for Zoe, well, she was there because her dad is the club's national development coach. Perfect example, right, of being in the right place at the right time. Thank you so much for being with us. You can watch anywhere, anytime on the free CBC News app and subscribe to the National's YouTube channel. I'm Asha Tomlinson. Take care.